of the information that you'll give me in part 2 of the final project. Today in class, we're going to continue the conversation about finances and the way that money and our financial statements tell a story about our business. And in that, you're going to need to really pay attention to what we talk about today, because a lot of what I go over are some of the things that you're going to be responsible for doing in your final project in part 2. There's a lot to talk about today, and I won't kid you and tell you this is my favorite subject to talk about. It's really not, but I try to make it as simple as possible and put it in terms that are much easier to understand. So along the way, like I said, I know there's a lot and it's pretty dense. If you get confused or you have any questions about any of it, please feel free to email me, reach out. And if we need to set up a one-on-one time, just email me and I'll be happy to try to go over all of this with you. Now, if you remember back in last class, we talked about our financial statements as a story. And I introduced you to the different houses in the story. We have 4 different houses, and we talked about each of the characters who live inside those houses. Now, it's important that you understand who lives in each house, because today we'll start to talk about how they interact with each other. And we'll start to talk about timing and why timing matters in determining our financial statements. We'll expand upon that conversation on Thursday when we start talking about looking for sources of money. And at what point you are in the process, the entrepreneurial process, will determine a lot about where we go to seek money to help fund our business. So let's pick right up where we left off. I'm going to share screen with you here and bring up the whiteboard. As always, give me just a minute to get my screens readjusted. After I share these, it gets a little bit weird. I work from multiple monitors at home. And so when I share screens, I wish that Zoom could read my mind and knew exactly where I wanted things to end up when I started sharing screen, but obviously it can't. But we should be good to go now. So let's continue the conversation. Remember, we talked about the different houses. And one of the houses that we talked about here was the startup house. Then we had opening day. And from there, we're going today to go into the income statement discussion. Remember, income statement is also known as the P&L. On the final project, you will be responsible for determining startup costs for your business. And you're also going to be responsible for doing the first 12 months pro forma P&L statements for your business. And we're going to talk about these today. I will provide you some templates on the website that you can use, but the items that go into each one of your financial statements is going to be up to you and dependent upon your business and the sales and expenses that you expect to have. So you'll have to think through those. Now remember, startup costs are everything that you spend money on prior to opening your business. This is as easy as just listing out everything that you've paid for and putting the dollar figure with it. When we finish that, we'll add it up and we will have a total of startup costs. I want you to think through everything that you'll need to pay for before you start your business. Now, for sake of ease, let's all assume that the business that we're looking at opening, doing pro formas for, is going to open on January 1. Now, everyone used this opening date. And this makes it much easier because remember we talked about our P&Ls. We said they follow a time period. So we're going to look at months, January, February, March, and so on, until we do all 12 months for the business. Now, pro forma means we're estimating. We're guessing an educated guess about what our P&Ls are going to look like for each month of the first year that we're open. That sounds a little bit daunting, but it's really not as hard as you think it is. Let's go back and let's think about the characters who live inside the P&L. The first character that lives in the P&L here was our gross sales. That's our total sales for the time period we indicate. The next character who lives inside this house is our cost of goods sold. That's how much it costs us to produce one unit that we sell. We subtract cost of goods sold from gross sales, and that gives us net sales. Now I'm going to give you another nickname for net sales today, and I forgot to give it to you in last class. I'm sorry, but this is also known as gross profit. So when we say gross profit, net sales, we're talking about the same thing. So gross sales minus cost of goods sold gives us gross profit. Then we have to subtract out our overhead or our fixed cost. You know, it's got multiple nicknames. So then we're going to say our operating expenses. All the same thing. So let's subtract out our fixed expenses, get to the bottom line. And here we're either going to have profit or loss. So let's think for a minute about these numbers and how would we estimate those for the first year of our business. I'll go ahead and tell you that your fixed expenses or your fixed costs are probably the easiest to estimate. You can go out and find these numbers. For example, if you tell me that you're going to open a retail store and you're going to rent the office, then one of your fixed expenses would be rent. Utilities are going to be a fixed expense. You will have to think through what your monthly fixed expenses are going to be. And I want to know that you really thought through this. I want to see a good list of items that show me you're really aware of some of the things that you're going to have to pay for on a monthly basis. Now, a lot of you already manage your own home. So you know what your fixed expenses are at home. It's not that different for a business. So you're going to estimate these numbers. Now, because they are fixed expenses, this makes it quite easy for us because they'll stay pretty stable from month to month. You know, the numbers might vary a little bit, and let's just say you're in Alabama and you're going to open a brick and mortar store or an actual store that people can walk into. We know utilities are going to vary. Power bill is going to be higher in the summer months when it's hot because it costs more to cool than it does to heat. So we can see these numbers may vary, but overall, excuse me, lots of pollen in Alabama, by the way, lots. Overall, these numbers are going to stay the same. So once you do your due diligence and your homework, identify what your fixed costs are going to be each month, assign a number to it. We can carry those out for each month. Those are really the easiest ones. The second easiest to start to think about is your cost of goods sold here. So let's go over here and think about cost of goods sold. And remember, in last class, we talked about selling rocking chairs. And we said we were going to sell them for $50, and the cost to produce one rocking chair is $20. So our cost of goods sold is $20. Now that $20 is broken out into the different raw materials that it takes to build this rocking chair. So we need wood, we need stain. Now we're also going to need some hardware in the form of screws, nails, whatever it is that we decide to use to put the rocking chair together. And let's guess here, let's just say we have to spend $15 on lumber. Lumber right now, the cost of lumber is astronomical. It is out of the roof, by the way. So if you don't know that yet, it's big. Let's say we spend $2 in stain for each rocking chair and $3 in hardware. Add these numbers together and it gives us $20 for each chair. Now, because we know that, cost of goods sold is pretty easy. It's a variable cost right here. So however many rocking chairs we estimate that we're going to sell, if we're going to sell 10 the first month, 20 the next, then cost of goods sold is already determined for you. So it's pretty easy to put into the pro forma based upon what you determine your sales are going to be. So let's come back over here to cost of goods sold. Pardon me. Sorry about that. Because I am going to expect you on the final project to tell me in detail what the cost of goods sold is for each item that you tell me you're going to sell. whatever your solution is. And I want you to break it down for me like this. Tell me how much you're spending on each of the raw materials if in fact you're building it. If you are selling something like you're going into a business opportunity, perhaps, much like I did with the bicycle shop, then your cost of goods sold would be what you pay the supplier for the bicycle. If you are selling a service, coaching services that I sell through my personal company, I don't have a cost of goods sold for a service. So when it comes to a service, we would have gross sales, no cost of goods sold. Net sales would equal the same number, only on services. So I hope that all makes sense. And again, I do want to see you determine what your cost of goods sold are. Now, along that line, I want to go over something with you that seems to confuse a lot of people, and I see it over and over again. So let me walk you through an example, and that'll better help me explain what I want to talk about. Now, the odds of being able to go to a Home Depot or a Lowe's and to buy exactly $15 worth of the wood that you need to buy to build the rocking chair, exactly $2 worth of the stain that you need, and $3 worth of the hardware is really low. That's not how it works. In fact, what we're probably going to do is we're going to go to the store and we're going to buy in bulk. We're going to buy a lot of wood that we can cut down and make rocking chairs out of. We're going to buy a big gallon of stain, and then we're going to buy a big bag of the hardware that we need. So if we do that, we have to determine within each one of those, how much of the stain do you use for one rocking chair? So if you buy a 16-ounce bucket of stain, and let's just say it's $16, and you use 2 ounces of that 16-ounce stain per rocking chair, if it was $16 for 16 ounces, we know it cost you $1 per ounce. If we use 2 ounces, then our cost of goods sold for the stain is $2 per rocking chair. I hope that made sense. Same concept for the hardware. We buy it in bulk. We determine a price per nail based upon if we buy, let's just say we buy 100 nails. And in that, there's a price for the 100 nails. We paid $30 for the 100 nails. We can do the math, figure out how much it costs per nail. Then we can add up how many nails we needed per rocking chair. And we're going to know our cost of goods sold for the hardware for the rocking chair. So this is how you will determine your cost of goods sold. Now, as I tell you that, let's remember I said, well, we're going to go buy in bulk. So let's pretend we went to the store and we bought $500 worth of materials, broken down into a lot of wood. We bought stain and we bought a lot of hardware. And let's imagine for a moment that this would allow us to build several chairs. Now we've determined that our cost of goods sold is $20 per chair. If we spent $500, then 20 into 500 means we could build 25 rocking chairs. Okay, so I know, call me out on it. Would that really happen that we'd have even numbers like that? No, but for sake of example, just go with me because I'm not a super strong at doing math in my head. So $500 worth of supplies, $20 each to build the rocking chairs, 25 rocking chairs. Now that all makes sense, but this is where people get confused. So what people like to do is say, well, you know, over here in the month of January, I went to Home Depot and I spent $500 on supplies to buy rocking chairs. And they want to put that $500 right there and try to subtract it out. But that is incorrect. Remember, cost of goods sold is a variable cost that varies based on how many you sell. So this would totally skew our story and make our story wrong. Let's just say we sold 3 rocking chairs at $50 each. that would mean our sales is $150. Now, if you try to put $500 there as your cost of goods sold, looks like you've had a pretty bad month already. That's not the number we put. In fact, if we sold 3 rocking chairs and it cost us $20 each to make the rocking chairs, our cost of goods sold here is actually $60. So what do we do with that $500? We go visit another house real quick, and we go over to the balance house. Now, the balance house, remember, it has assets. And one of the types of assets was current assets. And an example of current assets is inventory. After we go spend $500 at the store and build 25 rocking chairs, this is going to show up in the balance sheet. In inventory, we have $500 in inventory in the form, and we're just going to make a little note here, in the form of 25 chairs. That's where it shows up. Now, for the current liability, let's just say we paid for it with a credit card. So if we paid for it with a credit card, then we've got an accounts payable sitting over here as a current liability of $500. Now, when we pay this $500, it still doesn't show up on the income statement. It actually is going to show up from cash out. After we pay it, this will erase from our liability sheet because we don't owe anybody anymore. So if we don't owe them, it erases. Cash out goes down by $500, and then that's done. Now up here, we've still got our rocking chairs sitting there, and we're recording those because at cost of goods sold, 25 of them at 20. Now, if once we sell 3 rocking chairs, remember we say we sold 3 in the month of January. What happens is we record those there, 3. Inventory goes down by 3. We now have 22. This goes down by the number we sold. This is now $440 in inventory. Now, I hope that made sense. I know that, like I said, this one gets really confusing. And when people buy raw materials, which is how we think about this, in order to build our product, this always shows up in the balance sheet. It does not show up over here on income statements. Now, it's possible that you're going to have some raw materials in your startup costs. I suspect you will. I suspect we'd want to build some rocking chairs before we actually open. Go ahead and record those over here. And then we'll worry about letting the accountant properly move those to the balance sheet for you. Don't worry about trying to do that. Let the experts handle it. So I hope that that made sense for you. And we're starting to see now how the houses work together. We have inventory. As we sell something, inventory goes down by the number we sell. The number that was recorded on the income statement goes up. All right, so this all should be making sense for you so far. Again, I'm going to want to see startup costs from you and a pro forma for the first 12 months. In order to do the pro forma, you first of all need to determine your fixed expenses and find the numbers for those. If you say you're going to open a store in Tuscaloosa, it's really easy to find the rental price for retail space in Tuscaloosa. It's also easy to find the rental price for retail space in whatever city you live in, whether it's for an office or for a retail front. So do yourself a favor, go do the homework and find it out. So fixed expenses is the first ones to come up with. The second thing that you need to come up with is your cost of goods sold. Now, this leaves the hard one. And now we've got to estimate how much we're going to sell. This is a little bit difficult. But before we can estimate how much we're going to sell, we have to determine a price for our product. Remember I told you last class, determining a price is actually a very scientific method. It's not just well, I think that's what they'll pay. and I think that's what they'll pay is always wrong. So if my competitors are selling rocking chairs for $50 and I make the statement of like, I think I'll sell mine for $49 so that mine will be $1 cheaper and they'll come buy from me, my response to you every time is going to be, why did you leave $1 on the table? Your customers have already told you that they're willing to pay $50 for a rocking chair. Why would you leave $1 on the table? Don't attract customers by leaving money on the table. You attract customers by knowing your target customer, by doing your research into their behaviors, and by establishing the proper channels to inform them and the proper customer relationship so that they want to buy from you and they never think about spending $1 less. Never forget that. I have this problem with college students mostly who tend to undervalue themselves and tend to undervalue their products because they're a college kid. Don't ever let that skew your thought process. We're going to talk about now, how do we determine what our sale price is? So we've determined our cost of goods sold. Let's talk about how to come up with a price. Now we're going to need to go through 3 different things before we determine what our price is. And the first things we need to do are some research. So first, let's do some secondary research. This consists of, let's go see what the competitors are charging. So look at your competition's pricing. Also, you guys have access to phenomenal industry knowledge and reports inside the Bruno Library as students. There are some reports in there. Go find like the Mintel reports within your industry, and it's going to give you every industry average you could ever imagine. So you're going to want to go do some homework there on what's happening in your industry. We're building rocking chairs, so we're going to be looking in the furniture industry, what's going on there, and seeing what are average sell prices for the industry. So grab those numbers and have them on hand. The second thing we might want to do is something called primary research. And a good time to do primary research is in your customer validation. Now, as part of the second part of Project 2, remember, I want you to construct some questions that you would use with a customer validation interview. And remember, those should be open-ended questions. A really good question to include in your customer validation interview is, after we've established that they have a problem that they want solved, a good question is, how much would you be willing to pay for a product that would solve that problem for you? And they're going to give you a price range. So with that being said, perhaps in our customer validation, we found out that our customers are willing to pay between $40 and $50 for a rocking chair. Well, if we know our competition is already selling them for $50, our customer validation has told us they're willing to sell them for $50, then we're on the right track here for saying, $50 is looking like a good sell price. Now, the third thing that you need to look at is your cost of goods sold. Now, obviously, your sell price has to be greater than your cost of goods sold. If not, you're not going to make any money. And in fact, I'm going to introduce our first ratio that you need to know. In fact, we need to know that our markup percentage from cost of goods sold to sell price is sufficient. Now, when you go look in these Mintel reports in Bruno and the databases and find your industry, it'll tell you what your industry average markup percentage is. You can find that there so you can kind of know if you're on the right track. But also in the book, it gives you the formula for determining your markup percentage. And it is your sell price. Let's just pretend it's 50 minus, and it says cost to produce in the book. Let's go cost of goods sold. We're going to say they're the same thing. Minus your cost of goods sold divided by your cost of goods sold. So if we did this for us, this would be 50 minus 20 divided by 20. Gives us 3 over 2, which gives us, y'all, I don't do math in my head. I shouldn't have done that. 3.2, this might be the wrong number. If it is, just kind of go with me. Our markup percentage, turn it into a percent, and then there we have the number of our markup percentage. Okay, now this is important, and we're going to come back to this markup percentage and talk about different examples of this. But for now, we need to know cost of goods sold. We need to know our primary research to determine what our customers say they're willing to pay and what our competitors are choosing and what industry averages are. Once we have all of this information, then we can make a really good, educated determination about what our selling price should be. And I hope that that makes sense. So with this one, we're going to go with $50. Okay, so now what do we do? How do we determine what our sales are going to be? When I work with entrepreneurs, and I've worked with so many over the years, I always start in the same place with them when we get to this point. And now you need to know, like the entrepreneurs that I work with, I go through all of the same processes with them that I'm going through with you in this class. I teach them how to do the due diligence associated with looking at whether or not we should open this business. Is it really an opportunity? We go through how to do all of the homework for filling in the business canvas, and then we get to the financial part. And when we get to the financial part, I'm like, okay, so everything else on paper looks good, but now we have to look at the numbers and see if we can make this work. And how do we know if it works or not? This is when I ask the magic question. And you need to know your answer to this magic question. You might know it now, you might not, but it is important that you always know what this number is. The magic question is, once we get to the bottom of this P&L here, let's just say we've added up all of the months for a year, and this is our 12-month total, just meaning we've added across, right? This is our 12-month total. The magic question, what does that number have to be to make it worth it for you to do this? You've got to know that number, and it's got to be worth it to you. There are plenty of businesses that have a positive number there, but what if that positive number is only $100? Is that worth it for you, for all the work that you're going to do, to have $100? I'm going to guess not. I'm going to guess that as you've taken jobs over the years, you've had a number in mind of what you feel like the salary should be and what you're willing to accept. And I'm sure that you've probably walked away from some jobs or wouldn't even consider a job if that number didn't match what would make it worth it for you. It's the same in owning a business. So determine your magic number. And once you determine your magic number, then we can work backwards. Remember, I told you in last class, like kind of think about having a 5-year goal. What's your 5-year goal? And if you know what that 5-year goal is and where you want to be then we can work backwards and make mini goals for you to achieve to be sure that when you hit the 5-year mark, you're exactly where you want to be. The same is true in business. So we need to determine what is the number for you. Now, for sake of mathies, and we all know I can't do math in my head, we're going to say you want this number to be $120,000 at the end of a year. And so when we do that and we go back over the 12 months, then it's easy for us to say, on average, each month, our profit needs to be $10,000. Well, if we know that, then we can start working backwards, going up the income statement to figure out what these numbers need to be in order to hit where we want to be. So let's look at that. Let me clean this up just a little bit. And let's see what that looks like. Now remember, we've determined our fixed expenses. We did that in the beginning. And let's just say that, on average, our fixed expenses are going to be totaled up $5,000 per month. That's going to be include our rent, our utility, insurance, payroll, just on average $5,000 a month. We know that in order to break even, let's figure out where we even have to go to break even. Let's work backwards. 10,000 minus 5. We know our net sales or our gross profit needs to be at least $5,000 just to break even. At this point, if we said 5 minus 5, that'd give us a 0 there. That's break even. So what do those sales have to look like? Well, let's go back up and let's just do some little scenarios here and try to work it out. And there is no magic formula here unless you want to go back to algebra. If you want to go back to algebra, by all means, go do that. If you don't want to go back to algebra and think about how to do x plus y equals 5,000, to just make up some scenarios. Think about, well, gee, if I sold 100 rocking chairs, 100 times 50 would give me $5,000. Okay, that's my sales. If I sold 100 chairs, my cost of goods sold is $20. Then 100 times 20 means my cost of goods sold would be 2,000. 5,000 minus 2,000? Nope. 100 rocking chairs is not enough. Okay, well, let's add to it. What if I sold, I don't know, 150 rocking chairs? We would say 150 times 50 and get a number. Plug in the cost of goods sold and get through. Now, I happen to know that we're going to need to sell 170 rocking chairs. 170 times 20. Let's get out our trusty calculators and let's see. 170 times 50. Oops, I can't even do a calculator. This is so sad. $8,500 in sales if we sell 170 rocking chairs. Now, if we sell 170 rocking chairs at cost of goods sold, 170 times 20 means our cost of goods sold is $3,400. 8,500 minus 3,500 gives us $5.1 thousand. So we've got to sell 170 rocking chairs just to hit break even. But we don't want to break even. We want this number to be 10,000. So with that being said, we're going to have to think about doubling that number, probably more than that. We're going to have to say times 4 on that number, just because that's the way the math works out. But you would continue the same scenario where you're trying to figure out how many rocking chairs you need to sell to get to $10,000 here. So if we want this to be 10,000 and this is 5, we know, pardon me, our net sales need to be $15,000. 15 minus 10, 5 gives us 10. So what do the numbers look like there? Now, if we sold, and I've worked out these numbers earlier, so if we sold 680 rocking chairs, and you can just, like I said, go through scenarios until you find your numbers. I just happen to have done this already today. If we have to sell that, 680 rocking chairs gives us $34,000 in sales. 680 times 50. 680, excuse me, times 20, I did that wrong, times is 13,600 in cost of goods sold. So if we look at the math there, let me make sure I've got this right. I do. 34,000 in net sales minus 13,600 in cost of goods sold. Oh, we don't have to do that many. It gives us $20,400. We can even come down a little. It was 640. It should have been 640. But you can see here how we're trying to come up with the number that we're going to sell. So let's back this down. And we need to sell 640 rocking chairs. Well, if we need to do that, let's see where that gets us. 640 rocking chairs at $50 each is $32,000. Come on. 640 rocking chairs, cost of goods sold is $12,800. 32,000 minus 12,800 is 19,200. So we're getting even closer. And we will keep working this down until we get to a number closer to 15,000. And then that's going to tell us exactly how many rocking chairs we need to sell. Keep just going through scenarios until you get the numbers that give you 15,000 or thereabout. Now let's pretend like it was 600 rocking chairs. I'm just going to throw out a number. So let's pretend like we have to sell 600 rocking chairs per month in order for us to get to $120,000 in profit by the end of the year. This is where you have to sit down and really think. Is it even feasible for me to be able to sell 600 rocking chairs per month? Is it feasible for me to be able to keep that many rocking chairs in inventory? Do I have enough space? Do I have enough time in the day to actually be able to build that many rocking chairs? When I look at my target market, is there enough market share out there for me to be able to capture enough to sell 600 rocking chairs per month? I don't know the answer to those questions. And right now, you don't either. Which means that we need to get back to the research over here, start pulling some of these reports, the Mintel reports, looking back at our target market, doing a little bit more research there to determine how many people are out there and how much they're willing to spend, how often they buy rocking chairs. And we've got to see, is this feasible? Not only is it feasible, but how much work is it going to require from you to make that happen? And then at this point is where you start to make a decision. Is it worth it for me? Can I do this? It's important. Now, we know that our 5-year goal, let's just say that, 600 rocking chairs per month. We also know that in January, February of our first year, those kind of sales are not going to happen. We're going to start really slow and start to ramp up. And because we start really slow and start to ramp up, we know that our first year, we get down here to the bottom line, we're probably going to be working at a loss. Most businesses don't make money the first year, maybe not even the second, perhaps not even the third. And the reason for that is because our sales numbers are not large enough to cover our fixed costs. Not yet. It takes time for these numbers to build. Now on Thursday, we're going to talk a lot about different places to find money. And I want to go ahead and mention a term to you right now. The money that we use to pay our fixed cost is called working capital. We're going to come back to that. That's going to be important. But here we've got to determine how quickly we can start to ramp up sales. How long will we be operating at a loss? And the way that we determine how our sales are going to ramp up are by looking at industry averages and doing some really good educated guesses. I'm going to guess, let's just say we sell 10 rocking chairs our first month, 15 the next, and so on and so forth until in year 3, perhaps we get to selling 600 a month. But with that being the case, we know it's going to be a slow ramp up. In any pro forma financial statements, It's a guess. That's pro forma means. And it's like standing in the wind and the wind is blowing south. And you've got a handful of sand. When you throw the sand in the air, we've made a really good educated guess that all the sand is going to blow south with the wind. However, things happen. What if at the moment that you throw your sand up, the wind dies and all your sand just falls down? We'd made a good educated guess, but educated guesses don't always play out. We just need to be sure that when we make our pro forma for our first 12 months, that we've done some homework and they look, pretty on track for what we think might happen in the market. Easiest thing to come up with, your fixed expenses. The second thing is cost of goods sold. Determining your sell price has to happen, and then we can start to estimate the way sales will ramp up. Now, I'm going to expect you to do your first 12 months pro forma financials for me. So I'm going to be looking for startup costs from you. I'm going to be looking at, you're going to tell me in detail how you determine your cost of goods sold. Tell me in detail how you determined your sell price. And then I need to see a pro forma for the first 12 months, a pro forma income statement for first 12 months, and show me how your sales are going to ramp up. And this is also going to show me that you understand the relationship between cost of goods sold and gross sales. It's also going to let me know that you understand how fixed costs work. So what we've done in determining our startup costs and our pro formas is, let's talk about it in terms of our story. We've just made an outline. This is an outline of the way that we want our story to go. So we've made the outline. This is how we think it's going to happen. We've laid all of it out there. Now it's time for the store to really open and to really start operating our business. Once we do that, then we can actually print our true income statements for each month. So we're going to operate for the month of January. We finished it up. We can print our income statement, our actual one for the month of January. Now it's time to do what we call reading our story. Now, when we start to read our story, we're going to be reading these financial statements, income statements, but each income statement by itself really doesn't tell you anything. It's a bunch of numbers, some interesting numbers, but it doesn't tell us a story at all. So when you look at an income statement all by itself, no wonder it looks Greek. It means nothing unless you have something to compare it to. So the way that we begin to read our story, we have our pro forma for January, what we estimated, and we've operated our business for our first month. Now we have our actual. We're going to compare our actual P&L to our pro forma P&L. Did we do worse than we thought we would? Are we right on track? Or did we do better than we thought? If we did better, that's great. If we're right on track, that's great as well. But what if we were doing worse? This is when we need to understand all of the characters in the story so that we can go back to each one of the characters that live in the P&L house and see which one we need to adjust so that we can start to course correct our story. We don't want it to continue down doing a worse path. So that's the way we start reading the story. We move on to February. Let me stop sharing screen here for just a moment. We move on to February. And once we move on to February, then we have more comparison points. So income statement, actual for the month of February, we open our business. We can compare it to our pro forma February, the outline we made, and actual. How are we doing? Are we doing better than we estimated we would? Are we still right on track, or are we doing worse? And so if we're doing worse, once again, we need to go look at that cast of characters that live in that house and see which one's the troublemaker. And that troublemaker needs to go to timeout. We've got to get them back in line. So go find that character and course correct. February can now also be compared to January actual. So we can start looking at month over month. March, same thing. March actual, we compare to January actual, February actual, and we can also compare it to our pro forma. Again, an individual income statement by itself means nothing. You have to have something of value to compare it to. And once we do the comparison, then what we're trying to figure out is, are we doing better than we thought we would be? Are we right on track, or are we doing worse? And if we're doing worse, then that means the story we're reading is not going the way we want, and it is time to course correct. So go figure out which one of your characters is off kilter, and let's figure out what we need to do to fix it. Now, I will tell you, it's really important to also understand a few of the ratios that are listed in the book, so that when you start to read the story, you get a better understanding of what the story looks like. Now, we've already mentioned here, we talked about our markup percentage. We'll come back and talk about that in just a moment. But another ratio that I want to bring to your attention is our profit margin, gross profit margin. Now, remember, I told you gross profit and net sales are the same thing, just nicknames for each other. And if that's the case, then we know, and let me screen share with you here again. We know that here, gross profit and net sales are the same thing. We know that we determine net sales by saying gross sales minus cost of goods sold. So gross profit here is a dollar figure. Once we add the word margin to it, it becomes a percentage. And you may think, why do I care about the percentage? I'm going to give you a real world example of something that happened to me in one of my businesses, and why the gross profit margin helped me find my problem. So some of you might remember back in the early 2000s, there was a time when gas prices were hitting like $5 a gallon. Oil was outrageous and gas prices had gone way up. Well, let me assure you that when gas prices are high, it's really good for the bicycle business. People start having staycations, they get their bikes out at home, and they start riding more for entertainment and for transportation. So it's really good for business. So when I started reading my story from month to month during that time period, and I started plotting out my gross sales were growing. They were looking just like that. They were looking good. Now, when I entered into a business opportunity with my bicycle supplier, that meant I signed a contract with them. And in that contract, it guaranteed me that I would have the same price for all of my inventory for the entire year, which means that my cost of goods sold for my inventory would remain steady for the entire year. I knew that. I remembered that. So that meant that my cost of goods sold should be charting parallel with my growth in sales, because it's a variable cost. So I knew all of this. However, when I started reading my story and looking at my bottom line, I was starting to see my bottom line decrease. I was not making as much money, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. So remember, we have up here, we've got gross sales minus cost of goods sold, gives us net sales, minus our operating expenses, gives us our bottom line, which is profit or loss. I had a profit, but I was seeing that profit decline. Because my sales were growing and my cost of goods sold stay the same for the entire year, I immediately went to my cast of characters within my operating expenses to try to figure out who my problem child was. I went through them and went through them and went through them. I could find no changes in my fixed expenses. Nothing was standing out. So I was really confused. I had no idea what was going on, but I kept seeing my bottom line decrease. So with that being said, I was like, I've got to pull something else because I can't find the answer. I pulled my gross profit margin. So to determine a gross profit margin, the gross profit margin is equal to your gross profit divided by your gross sales. and it gives you a percentage. And when I pulled that and charted it, I saw that happening. I was like, whoa, okay. So I didn't think this was the case, but it looks like my problem is in my cost of goods sold. So what's going on? Because remember, I had a business opportunity that gave me the same price. So I had to go pull the invoices from the filing cabinet, start looking through them, and I figured out my problem. Now, this is a good example of what we talked about in last class, where you need to pull in an accountant and be sure that everything you're keying into your software goes into the proper account. Because if it doesn't, you can't read your story correctly. So let's talk about what happened. One thing that happens in the bicycle business and with any other retail business is when gas prices go really high, the cost of shipping inventory to you also goes way up, way up. And what was happening is my shipping costs were built into just my cost of goods sold. I had not separated out price per inventory item and shipping. So while the price per item was staying the same, shipping costs were growing up. Hence my decline in my net sales, hence the decline in my bottom line. Once I figured that out, I was like, okay, well, I've got to make some changes. Now, one of the things that we prided ourselves on in Vela City was that we did a quick turnaround on ordering items for customers. So it's really hard for any small bike shop to carry every size of every bike available and every color available. You keep a good representation of the inventory that's available. So when a customer comes in, you size them for a bicycle. And then if you don't have the size and color in stock, we would order it for them. And we prided ourselves on ordering it the same day so that they could have the bike within a couple of days. Well, doing that one-off ordering was great until the price of shipping started going out the roof. And that was what was wrong. That was what was happening within our business. So I sat down and thought about it and went and talked to my guys that were working in the shop. And I was like, y'all, we're going to have to make some changes. We're going to have to only order bikes once a week. And it was that initial like, oh my gosh, but it's kind of our thing. It's kind of our thing. And I was like, I know it's kind of our thing, but kind of our thing is making us lose money now. So we've got to do a course correct. And so we talked about it. We had worked really hard to build that personal assistance customer relationship with our clientele. And because we understood that, then I told my guys, I said, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to be honest. That's the best we can do. And we're going to change our policies. And so we're going to order bikes once a week, and we're going to order bikes on Monday. And they were like, what if somebody comes in on Tuesday? I was like, well, we're not going to order their bike until the next Monday, and then they're going to have to wait a few more days after that. So, but just be honest with them and tell them what's going on. So this was the policy change we made. If you were willing to come in and wait until we did our weekly bike order and wait on your bike, we would absorb shipping costs like always. However, if you needed your bike sooner than that, we could still do that, but you had to pay shipping. And we were just super honest. And we didn't have one single customer give us any pushback whatsoever. But here, it was all about, number one, establishing that customer relationship, knowing what my channels are and what customer relationship to establish, being able to read my story and understand the different places to go look for problem children. And that was in being able to compare my P&L month to month, not just being able to look at the numbers, but knowing there are also some ratios that you should pull that are going to help you to determine where your problem children are. Now, this was a big deal. So I want you to know, like I said, this is a big deal for us, and it helped us course correct, and it helped us to start to reap the profit that we wanted to reap with those increased sales. Another one that I've mentioned to you over here is we talked a little bit about markup percentage too. And why does that matter? Now, your markup percentage is how much you mark up over your cost of goods sold to get your selling price. So after we've gone through all three steps of pricing, we look at what our markup percentage is. This is going to help us understand that we need to maintain that markup percentage even when sometimes the cost of goods sold might change. So for example, if last year, before the price of lumber went through the roof, we had started making rocking chairs, let's just say that last year it cost us $10 in wood to build the rocking chairs. So our total cost of goods sold last year would have been $15 per rocking chair. But the price of things change and the price of lumber changed. And this year it costs us $20 to build a rocking chair. This happens all of the time. And almost always that cost is passed on to the customer in a price increase. But we don't normally change our sell price quite a bit based upon the fluctuations in our cost of goods sold. Normally, we will do a course correct once a year. And we're used to seeing that. Customers are accustomed to 2020 price models are going to cost more than the 2019. Rent is going to increase every year. We're used to seeing that. So we usually do a course correct once a year. Now, there are some industries out there that have determined what their markup percentage is going to be. And as their cost of goods sold fluctuate, they fluctuate their sell price on an ongoing basis. It's not common, but it happens. And one really good example of that is gasoline. We're used to seeing the price of gas fluctuate. What's happening is the oil companies know exactly what their market percentage needs to be in order to maintain the bottom line that is valuable to them, the bottom line that they want. And so as the price of their cost of goods sold changes, we see the price of gas change. They do it on an ongoing basis. It's something they established early. And because we're used to it, we don't think anything about it. But please understand, the oil companies are always making their money because you're always seeing the price go up and down. So this is another one that you need to think about and keep in mind as we're trying to read our story. Now, this is a lot of stuff here. But what you have figured out today is, first of all, how to make an outline of what you want your story to look like. And now we've started looking at how do we read our story. And we read it over time as our financial statements are produced. We know that as we read the story, each individual financial statement by itself means nothing. We've got to compare it to something. We, in the first year, can compare our actual P&L to our pro forma P&L. How are we doing? And if we're not doing what we want, we need to go find that problem child living in the house and correct them. We can also compare month to month. Our sales growing, our sales decreasing, and we can start to see patterns. The longer that your store or your business is open, the longer your story is to read. The longer your story, the more patterns you'll start to see evolve. And you can start to compare year over year. And you'll see that it gets much easier over time to read your story and to make sure that you are performing the way that you like. Now that is a lot for today. So we're going to stop for today. Reminder, part 1 on your final projects due today. Looking forward to those. And in part 2, you're going to need to construct some of these financials. So start thinking about the industry you're in, start going to Bruno database, look up some Mintel reports for your industry, and start pulling some numbers. You're going to need to do your startup costs. You're going to need to do pro forma P&Ls for the first 12 months of your business. I want to see detailed cost of goods sold, and I also want to see in detail how you determined your sell price. Now, if you have any questions about any of that, please let me know. We'll stop here, and in next class, we're going to pick up with looking at all of these numbers, looking at time periods, and we're going to start seeing where's the best place to go when to try to get funding to make sure that we can open, grow, scale our business, and be profitable. All right, it's been a pleasure talking with you all today. I'll see you again next class.